Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Ephraim Graham. Worldwide condemnation of the ISIS terror group is mounting yet again following its third hostage execution. The latest victim is a British aid worker, but his death is prompting even louder calls for President Obama to rethink his strategy for defeating the group that still holds at least 2 more American and 2 more British hostages. British aid worker David Haynes is now the 3rd Western hostage the ISIS terror organization has killed.
David has been murdered in the most callous and brutal way imaginable by an organization which is the embodiment of evil.
There is now a global manhunt for Haynes's killers. It appears to be the same executioner with a British accent from the videos of Americans James Foley and Stephen Sotloff. Secretary of State John Kerry is in Paris today, pushing the president's plan to defeat ISIS and rallying U.S. allies to step up for the fight.
There are some that are clearly prepared to take action in the air alongside the United States.
Kerry has flip-flopped on whether the president's plan is a declaration of war or an aggressive counterterrorism operation. But no matter what you call it, many are still questioning if arming Syrian rebels and increasing airstrikes are enough. Senator Lindsey Graham warns there's no way the U.S. can defeat ISIS without American boots on the ground.
And to destroy ISIL, you have to kill or capture their leaders, take the territory they hold back, cut off their financing, and destroy their capability to regenerate.
Former Secretary of State James Baker agrees with Graham's assessment, and so do some former U.S. intelligence officers.
The only way you're going to destroy this organization is to confront them on the ground and kill them, and to use surrogates in the region. Iraq? No, Iraq is having a tough time holding on to their own territory. Syria's involved in a civil war.
But as the debate continues, ISIS is growing stronger with an estimated 30,000 troops and reports of an increasing bank account of nearly $3 million a day from oil sales. Some say we're seeing what President George W. Bush warned about in 2007 when he talked about the dangers of pulling out of Iraq too soon.
It would mean surrendering the future of Iraq to al-Qaeda. It would mean that we'd be risking mass killings on a horrific scale. It would mean we allow the terrorists to establish a safe haven in Iraq to replace the one they lost in Afghanistan. It would mean increasing the probability that American troops would have to return at some later date to confront an enemy that is even more dangerous.
That former U.S. intelligence officer Bob Ayers says unless the U.S., the U.K. and other European countries put ground forces in Iraq, quote, we'll never destroy ISIS. U.S. officials say a group of Islamic extremists in Syria poses a more direct threat than ISIS to the United States. A cell of al-Qaeda veterans from Afghanistan and Pakistan called the Khorasan Group traveled to join up with the Syrian Nusra Front, an al-Qaeda group. The jihadists were sent there by an al-Qaeda leader to recruit Europeans and Americans who can travel easily with U.S. passports. U.S. intelligence shows the group has also been seeking working in Yemen with bomb makers. They've already managed to place 3 bombs on U.S.-bound planes, though none of the bombs succeeded in downing the aircraft. The United States and the European Union are moving ahead with sanctions against Russia because of the crisis in Ukraine. Months of fighting have taken a heavy toll on parts of Ukraine. As George Thomas reports, CBN's Orphan's Promise has been helping meet both the physical and spiritual needs of Ukrainians caught in the middle of the crisis.
Galina Kucher will be the first to admit she's in unfamiliar territory. In 23 years of working for CBN, have you experienced anything like this?
No, I've dealt with social disasters all my career, but this is by far the biggest challenge I've ever had to face.
Since the crisis in Crimea erupted and pro-Russian separatists invaded parts of eastern Ukraine, she and her team have worked around the clock distributing humanitarian aid.
Today people need food, tomorrow they need medical assistance, or you have to evacuate them from the war zone. We weren't ready for this kind of disaster, but life has put us in such circumstances that we've had to risk our lives to save children, feed them, attend to their medical and psychological needs.
For several months now, Orphan's Promise has been running a hotline connecting a stream of refugees coming out of the war zone here in the east and the Crimean Peninsula, with families and churches willing to help.
This war has shown the true face of the Protestant church in Ukraine. They are united and helping. The government couldn't handle the flow of refugees, but thanks to the Christians, we were able to respond.
She's made several trips here to the war zone, and each time struggles with the magnitude of suffering and heartbreak.
In 23 years, I've coordinated hundreds of humanitarian distributions, but I have never had to hand out bread to people. It's just insane that in Ukraine, the country that grows wheat and is the breadbasket of Europe, people would be in need of bread.
And this is a war that's happening on the doorsteps of Europe.
Ukraine is a peaceful nation, and since our independence has never fought anyone, we gave away our nuclear weapons. We have no real army. I never thought our nation was at risk, especially from Russia.
About 1,000 Russian troops still reportedly operate in Ukraine, with an additional 20,000 on the Russian side of the border. Thousands of pro-Russian separatists firmly control large chunks of eastern Ukraine. Kucher says the situation in the rebel-controlled areas is dangerous and dire.
Some people that we have evacuated from the war zone were in such shock that they were close to a nervous breakdown. They were shaking non-stop and couldn't believe we got them out.
In between handing out bread and other critical relief supplies to hundreds of families, Kucher says her team is always ready to meet more than just physical needs.
We have many opportunities to share the gospel with people, pray with them, and I have even noticed how thirsty people are for the Word of God. They grab Bibles from our hands. People are open.
Nearly a week after a tenuous ceasefire was signed, explosions rocked the conflict-ridden Donetsk region overnight. Kucher says it's just another sad reminder of the challenges facing her war-weary countrymen. George Thomas, CBN News, Eastern Ukraine.
Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton appears to be once again ramping up for a race for the White House, stomping in the battleground state of Iowa this weekend ahead of upcoming midterm elections.
Hello, Iowa! I'm back! Well, it is true, I am thinking about it. But for today, that is not why I'm here. I'm here for the steak.
The former Democratic presidential contender has not declared her candidacy, as you heard, for 2016, but spending time in Iowa is often seen as a first step. It is her first time back in that state since her 2008 presidential run. Two possible GOP presidential candidates joined thousands of Americans to celebrate Star-Spangled Sunday. Former Governor Mike Huckabee and Senator Ted Cruz were on a panel of speakers at the event. Neither Huckabee or Cruz confirmed ambitions for the presidential election. The Family Research Council and Vision America hosted the event. Meanwhile, other celebrations were held around the country commemorating the 200th anniversary of the Star-Spangled Banner, like raising the flag at Fort McHenry, Maryland, where Francis Scott Key wrote the famous poem, which became our national anthem. A grieving football team has been forced to remove the cross decals they put on their helmets to honor two of the team members who were tragically killed. An attorney sent a letter to Arkansas State University saying the crosses violated the separation of church and state. Then the Freedom from Religion Foundation joined in, pressuring ASU, as it has in many religious rights cases around the country. One of the young men being remembered by the football team was Markel Owens, a former player at ASU, who was killed in a robbery. The other was the team's equipment manager, Barry Weyer, Jr., who died in a car crash. Weyer's parents feel crushed by the removal of the crosses, calling it a slap in the face.
I don't have my baby here, and he lived at that football stadium.
Players volunteered. It wasn't a forced issue. It wasn't a mandatory thing. The players knew Barry, Don, and Markel, and they were Christian boys. So they volunteered to wear crosses.
The crosses were positioned on the back of the helmet, and they included both the young men's initials. The Freedom from Religion Foundation said the crosses are on government property and therefore unconstitutional. Coming up, he was raised to hate Israel, what changed the Muslim's mind, and why he's now a big supporter of the Jewish state. German Chancellor Angela Merkel led a rally against anti-Semitism in Berlin Sunday, emphasizing she wants to make sure Jews feel safe in Germany. The recent Israeli-Hamas war has sparked huge protests in Europe and exposed growing epidemic of anti-Semitism. From protesters chanting death to Israel to gas the Jews to violent physical attacks against Jews. Merkel went on to say Jewish life is part of the German identity.
We want Jews to feel safe in Germany. They should feel that this country is our common home.
The president of the World Jewish Congress also lamented the rise of anti-Semitism, saying all the progress from the last 70 years has been darkened by this summer's protests. Many Muslims stand against Israel, so it is rare to find one who supports the Jewish state. In an interview with CBN News before the recent war, one British Muslim told us how he became a Zionist. CBN News senior editor John Waki has the story.
Qasim Hafiz is a Pakistani Muslim born, raised, and living in the UK.
As I was brought up around a lot of anti-Israel feeling, and especially for my dad, very blatant and direct Israel hatred and anti-Semitism.
As a university student, Hafiz campaigned against the Jewish state. He attended marches, handed out leaflets, and called for boycotts of Israel. He said he was even willing to die to free Palestine and rid the world of Israel.
My narrative was there was a Palestinian state, the Jews came from Europe, stole the land, and voila, Israel.
Then he found Alan Dershowitz's book, The Case for Israel, and decided to read it so he could refute what he thought was Zionist propaganda.
And I thought I'll buy it and be able to disprove it because Israel has no case. I know the history, I'm an expert in it all. So I start reading this book. And the most basic of facts about Israel and the Jewish people, I had no clue about. I mean, one of the most basic ones I came across was a Palestinian state has never existed.
And that was just the beginning. 2 years later, he visited Israel.
When you go to passport control and they say, what is the purpose of your visit? Just say you're here for a holiday. Don't say, well, I used to be anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. Now I'm not quite sure, so I thought I'd come and see what it's like.
After 8 hours in airport security, Hafiz was allowed into Israel.
It highlighted Israel's unique security situation. Look, it's not politically correct to say this, it's not nice to say this, but people from my background, people with my kind of name, have an awful tendency of blowing stuff up in Israel. And also, I was treated with a lot of respect. You want to see racism? Go to Saudi Arabia as a non-Arab.
When Hafiz arrived in Jerusalem, he saw different ethnic and religious groups mixing in the city.
Be it Muslims, be it people from African heritage, be it Europeans, be it people from the Middle East, it's just such a crazy mix of people. And then you see the signs in English and Hebrew and Arabic, and it straight away blows away that idea of apartheid and racism.
Family and friends initially thought Israel's Mossad Secret Service had recruited him. Now some have come around.
And there's this awful idea that people think it's a zero-sum game, that if you stand up for Israel, you're instantly anti-Arab. It's ridiculous. I have members of my family who are quite supportive of Israel now, which is nice. But with friends who have now turned their views to be more supportive of Israel, wouldn't say it publicly.
Hafiz says Muslims refuse to accept Israel's existence in the middle of the Arab world. Then there are conspiracy theories and the pack mentality.
I mean, it's that kind of ingrained that there's this global conspiracy by the Jews to destroy Islam and take over the world, and it's really sad, but this whole anti-Israel cause has become very popular. It's seen as the cool cause almost, and nobody wants to kind of break off from the kind of pack and be seen as an outsider. I mean, for me it was very difficult to go, okay, look, I was wrong. And I think that's a huge part of it.
To have a revelation about the Jews and Israel, Hafiz says the Muslims must embrace reality.
To actually step back and just look at the world, just think what you actually stand for. Is this irrational hatred over a group of myths that you've been told really worth it? And you've got to ask, do you really want peace? One of the most frustrating things for me is within the Muslim community, we have a double standard. We judge Israel and America by one standard which we refuse to apply to ourselves.
Hafiz says his aha moment came at the Western Wall in Jerusalem.
I feel I'm very blessed to be where I am because it has changed my life for the better. It's beautiful to wake up without this hatred, without this anger. Is it God? I don't know. Maybe.
John Waggy, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Up next, the world is being torn apart around us. So why is the European Union obsessing over vacuum cleaners instead? It's a stunning report you won't see anywhere else. It was supposed to be a shining symbol of European unity. Instead, the European Union is proving to be a bloated bureaucratic mess, and it's turned out to be highly unpopular, not only with European voters, but even with some members of the parliament itself. Bill Hurd brings us that story now from Brussels.
While Russia was fighting Ukraine and the Middle East was in chaos, the European Union was tackling the really important issues. Banning powerful household vacuum cleaners. EU bureaucrats made the heroic move in order to save the planet. Now, whenever Europeans vacuum with their weak vacuum cleaners, they'll be reminded of how European Union laws have taken over more and more of their lives. A former leader of the Czech Republic who grew up under communism came to Brussels and he gave a speech. And he told EU lawmakers that the European Union reminded him of the Soviet Union. And he was booed. Václav Klaus saw in Brussels a Soviet-style group of elites deciding what they thought was good for Europeans and then ramming it down their throats. But all of the new laws out of Brussels restricting vacuum cleaners or the size of fruit have not made Europeans freer or more prosperous. EU economic growth in the second quarter was zero, and economists say the third quarter is looking worse. Economic sanctions against Russia will rob Europe of key markets, and now even powerful EU member Germany is reported to be at risk of recession. In fact, the healthiest, most competitive economy in Europe is not even in the EU. It's Switzerland. So if the European Union isn't making Europeans freer or more prosperous, what's the point of it? Dutch filmmaker Peter Vlemix asked himself a similar question and made a documentary entitled Euromania.
The European Union, its mission statement is to improve the life of the European citizens. But in my eyes, it's improving the life of some European politicians.
Vlemix's film shows a corrupt, bloated bureaucracy that keeps growing and taking more and more sovereignty away from member nations, replacing 70 to 80% of national laws with EU laws.
Every law coming out of Brussels automatically overrules national law. So every day there is like laws coming and taking powers away from the countries.
And several years ago, when some European nations showed their disapproval of where the EU wanted to take them and voted down a proposed European constitution, the EU just went around voters and ratified one anyway. With its laws cranked out by an unelected European Commission and then forced on member nations, it certainly looks very undemocratic.
Those accusations are somewhat misplaced, but of course they make for nice sound bites.
Marco Incerti is with the Center for European Policy Studies in Brussels.
The European Union is not more undemocratic than other organizations, including national government. All of the surveys show that, in fact, the level of trust that European citizens have in the European Parliament is actually higher than the level of trust they have in their national parliaments, and it's way higher, for example, the level that the Americans have in the Congress.
But according to a Pew survey earlier this year, European support for the EU continues to fall. This was the opening of the European Parliament in July. While the EU anthem was played, several members stood with their backs turned. After disastrous May elections that led to historic gains by so-called Eurosceptic parties like Britain's UK Independence Party, the European Parliament is now full of members who don't like the European Union and, in fact, want to destroy it.
I don't just want Britain to leave the European Union, I want Europe to leave the European Union. I don't believe that flag, that anthem, and that president, whose name no one knows, really represent what Europe should be.
Pro-EU parties are still in the majority for now, and the behemoth that is the European Union will continue to rumble on. But despite a quiet summer, all is not well within the European Union. With yet another economic crisis on the horizon, anger at Brussels could flare up again. The European Union may seem big and unsinkable, but it may also be headed for an iceberg. Dale Hurd, CBN News, Brussels.
Well, finally today, the city of Jerusalem is often called the City of Gold. Now, a new exhibit shows gold often played a big part of the history of the city. CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell takes us to the City of David.
The exhibit, called Jerusalem of Gold, displayed some of the rare golden artifacts found in the City of David, the original Jerusalem.
These gold antiquities on display at the City of David help tell the story of Jerusalem, like this gold medallion from the 7th century.
It probably was meant to decorate an ancient Torah scroll.
Archaeologist Gabby Barkai says gold has been a part of Jerusalem's history for thousands of years.
Gold was represented very much in Jerusalem. The inside of Solomon's temple was covered with gold. Even the walls were gold-plated. The Ark of Covenant and the cherubim were covered with gold. Solomon's ivory throne was covered with gold.
The 5 gold coins on display are worth more than $500,000.
A young British volunteer from London was brushing a shelf in the wall, and suddenly, like a casino, golden coins started falling down. 264, it's the largest golden treasure found in Jerusalem.
The exhibit crowned the City of David's 15th annual archaeology conference. Aaron Horowitz says the City of David itself has changed the world.
In fact, this small area, the City of David, is only 45 dunams. It's about 11-something acres. It's a small, ancient city, but it's had more impact on humankind than any other city in the world.
Horowitz says the impact of the city is that the Bible was written there.
The Bible that came out of Zion has affected the spirit of man. We would probably be better off if we learned more from the Bible and tried to live according to the values of the Bible. So yes, I think that the Bible has had a tremendous impact on mankind, and I believe that it's not over, that the story is just beginning.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the City of David, Jerusalem.
And that's it for CBN News Today. For more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about, check out cbnnews.com. We'd love to hear from you on Facebook as well as at CBN News on Twitter. Join us again next time. Make it a marvelous Monday, everybody.